Scott, are you ready? All right. Call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. The first order of business today is a standard motion on two sets of minutes. Minutes dated December 16th, 2015 and January 20th, 2016. I think we'll do each one separate. Is that okay? Recommendation from you, maybe? Be okay? All right.
It has to be done separately.
Oh, thank you. So this time I'd ask for a motion concerning the minutes for December 16th.
Chairman, so move.
And a motion to approve.
I'll second.
And a second. Any discussion, correction, or addition to those minutes? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Minutes approved. Now I'd ask for a motion concerning the minutes dated January 20th, 2016. Of a motion?
I'll make that motion.
A motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Being none, all those in favor of the motion to approve signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minutes approved. Thank you. The regular agenda today, we have one item, final plat, is to consider a request for a final plat for the DPS subdivision. Site is generally located in the north half of northwest quarter of section 32, township 140 north, range 96 west. The site is approximately 28.66 acres. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please let us know what you'd like to do or what you're presenting.
Good morning, all. We've submitted the plat and the application.
Just give us your name.
Oh, excuse me. I'm Thomas Schmelzenbach from KLJ,
Alrighty.
and I've worked with Steve and Walter on this platting process. We've received a number of comments, all of which will be addressed before it's brought before the commission. These comments that we have are really technical as far as in nature, as far as line styles and the substance of those comments really had to do with some wording to as far as the representative. This parcel of land is for the middle school. I believe you have the information before you, but I'd be glad to answer any questions if it's unclear as far as what we're hoping to do here.
Anyone have any questions or comments?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make a comment on this. Please feel free to come forward. And at this time I'd ask any comments from our city engineer, Mr. Kubis.
Mr. Chairman, just one general comment on it. Mr. Schmelzenbach referred to, some of the comments that they've received on the drafting and the line style. Somewhat unique here, we do have a lot of easement out here already. All the road easement that was purchased out here, what we a lot of times consider road right-of-way, as it was purchased from NDSU. It is an easement, so we do have road easement that we'll be converting to right-of-way with this plat along 21st Street, and then also platting another easement just south of what will become that new right-of-way as a utility easement. And then this plat also dedicates the right-of-way. If you remember, when this plat went through, when it was owned as NDSU property, they were unable by their bylaws or their policies of NDSU that they wouldn't dedicate the right-of-ways and the easements on the plat. So now parcel has now changed hands. It's owned by the school district, and they're able to plat the right-of-ways. So this is probably a more traditional plat in the sense that we're getting the right-of-ways and the easements that we would normally want to see on any plat. So I think this is a more clean plat than it was when it came through as a NDSU property.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. This time I'd ask to hear from Mr. Josephson, our AICP City County Planner.
Yes, good morning.
Comments on
Thank you very much. Good morning, Commissioner Steve Josephson, City County Planner. This is a request for final plat for the DPS subdivision. You probably recall last year the final plat had come before you, and it was much larger. It was more in the nature of 80 acres, and it was approved by the City Commission, but it never got recorded. It never got signed and recorded. This is just coming back with this. This is just the portion that the school district is building the middle school on, and it was rezoned to public. So the staff has reviewed this and recommends approval for those remaining 50 acres. In the future, any future development will more than likely require platting of those properties and potential rezonings, and you may be seeing those in the near future. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Josephson? Any comments, questions from the commission? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing. I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Duncan?
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the DPS subdivision final plat as depicted in Attachment A and meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
A second? Any further discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommended. Thank you very much. Yes. That ends our standard and motions and regular agenda part of the portion of this meeting. Last meeting, and we've done it before, and I asked for opinion from the attorney. We've kept the meeting open through any further discussions we've got scheduled. And today we have scheduled a work session. And I would like to, instead of adjourning this meeting, which I've done before, kept it open and adjourn at the end of that work session.
That's the proper way to do it. It needs to be open for the work session.
Thank you. So this ends the regular portion of our agenda, and we'll go into a work session here. At this time, we're going to take a 3-minute recess. Meeting, and at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Hadley. Between Mr. Hadley and Mr. Josephson, they're going to go through the 5 items on the work session for us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to kind of explain how we have this organized and then the whole discussion on adjournment of the meeting, and I just think it's important. In the past, during work sessions, there hasn't really been a real good short synopsis of the direction that the board has given. And so what I've asked, Brandy will be doing some, as you see, a short synopsis in the minutes that just kind of reflects a direction that we're actually going, just so we can all look back, and also the public has an idea of the direction that we're going on these different items. So just to clarify that, because it seems to have created a little confusion. The first item that we're going to talk about, revised minimum lot size for single family, and it should say attached units. It's a typo in there. I believe you all remember the last couple times we've had discussions on that. If you look at the first example, and it's up in Cook's edition, this particular property, and there's a number of these up there, works quite well. I think some of the commissioners had a concern that we were looking at lot sizes that might be too small, and I would concur. Some of the areas that we have in town, States Edition, up in Cooks, these particular units work real well. There's some other units that don't work as well. And they're on just a little smaller lots. This particular lot is, these lots in this area are 47 to 50 feet per side. I think we were talking about the 40 to 45 range was what we were visiting on at our last meeting. And I would suggest that we look at a 45 minimum. I think it allows, if you look at this particular picture of this home, it allows two distinct entrances. It allows two-car garages. It actually allows a side yard that they have access to the rear yard. They have parking, good, bad, or indifferent. Most people do desire to have at least access to the backyard in that area. And I think it works well in conjunction with and adjacent to single-family residential areas. So that, my suggestion on our moving forward would be that we look at a 45-foot minimum for single-family attached lots in the future. And I just wanted to get your input on this, and all of these items that we're talking about, all 5 of these today, we're actually looking for direction to take this and next month have a public hearing on it. So that's kind of the sequence of how we're going to try to attack some of these items that, that keep coming up that we want to address. I'm going to ask Craig, and Craig and I will sit down again with the subdivision ordinance and go through some specific items that have been problems and put them on the agenda, talk about it. The following month, if everybody's on board, actually schedule it for a public hearing. So then the public would have notice to what we were looking to change, and we could clean up some of these items that I think that just need to be cleaned up to clarify our process and our standards right now. So anyway, on this particular item, that would be my suggestion. I'd like to hear your thoughts, comments.
Must be awful good.
Well, I'm going to show some of my ignorance here. Are these units typically rental units?
I think when they're first constructed, I think a lot of them in Dickinson were. I think now, actually, we have a kind of a boom, if you will, on the sale of these types of units. One contractor in town that sold 7 in the last couple of weeks. And so the prices have come down a little on them, but they're basically saying that the target market that they were choosing to, and Shirley, we might jump in on that because you probably have some experience on it. The target market that they tried to target when they built these initially could not or did not get into these units as they thought they would, and now they are. And so I think now it's probably more of an ownership.
Okay. So at a minimum, a builder is building these with the potential to sell them individually. Right. Okay. So what has to happen then when a builder is building this? He's got to lay it out so that the common wall lays on the property line, basically.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that can be done. As far as the construction of the unit, I don't know there's really anything different than if they're just going to come in and build a duplex, because the same standards apply. It's just we've had some issues with the lot, not necessarily, the unit not necessarily sitting on the lot in the center, and when it was divided, that created lots that did not meet our standards. So we're, all the developers that we meet with, Stephen and I met with a couple of the last few days, and we're getting that word out. So people understand that that's the direction we're going, and it's fine. I think people just need to know it. I don't think there's going to be any pushback from actually doing it. If their intent to divide it is to divide it, then they'll have to line it so they can divide it in the future.
to add to that, Commissioner Jackson, it's one of the things that we're going to ask is when they actually come in with their building permit, that they identify this as being, you know, a single, say the structure is going to be single-family attached. You know, so at least we know at the construction phase what they're planning to do. Typically, what'll happen is they'll come in with their construction, they'll come in with their site plan and their permit, and then as they approach the point where they're going to get their certificate of occupancy, then they come in for an administrative lot split. That's typically what happens. You know, and then at that point, both of those lots go under, are usually sold off. They go under separate ownership. We did do a survey. We looked at some of the lots. We used the lot splits as a basis for looking at average sizes for these, and this is where that minimum width of 45 feet, and I think we looked at, what, a minimum square footage of around 5,000 square feet. We found that most of the lots actually exceeded that minimum lot size. But that's just typical of the, going through the lot splits, what we found out, that 45-foot width minimum and a 5,000 square foot minimum were most of the lots actually exceeded that. So we did have a basis for recommending a minimum lot width.
And the definition will be cleared up. This is going to be called a single-family detached?
Attached. It's a typo. It's supposed to be single-family attached.
And Commissioner Abrahamson, there already is a definition of single-family attached in the code, as there is a definition of duplex, and it's...
Duplex, we do have that term is allowed?
Yeah, that is in the code, and single-family attached is also in the code. And the way they are, we may look at that duplex definition and clean that up a little, but the single-family attached describes what's, it describes what's going on when they build that structure with 2 units and split the lot.
Yeah, my mind was a little detached when I read that, and I was thinking, what am I reading? So, thank you.
In the proposed amendment, you guys have listed 40 to 45 feet and 4,000 as the minimum lot.
It's just it's a point of discussion. I mean, I think what Stephen was saying was, on these particular lots, that's what we're looking at as workable models. I think our discussions before related back to the 4,000 and 40-foot model. So I think if we, I think just in looking at what's out there on the ground, the 45-foot plus a few, which just seems to be what the norm is, those actual units seem to work best. And I'd like to hear from Shirley what works best as far as the market sales. I'm assuming those do, because they seem like they've all been occupied.
Just turning it on, sorry. I know that the ones that were smaller than what we're proposing here were an issue on the sides of the properties, especially down on Krasinski Drive down there. And then I remember at our last meeting, Jason was talking about how you have to reposition them because of easements. So they are harder to sell if you don't have enough side room, because they're so narrow, and then you have to park in your driveways. There isn't any extra parking on the street either. The bigger ones sell quicker than the smaller ones.
And I'd like to hear from all of you as far as what your feeling is. I mean, looking at State's Edition, looking at this particular area up in Crooks, how it flows. I mean, I think what we really want to do is try to blend these as best we can to the single-family areas, which I think was the intent. Yeah. And in some of the portions of town, it works better than others. And I think the State's Edition, almost those lots for a number of those units, those sprawling ranch units, are almost too big. from the standpoint of, I think Jason mentioned this last time, those lots really, but as far as how they fit in with the single-family area, it's a great transition because you really don't feel like you're leaving a single-family area. It kind of just melds together. So I think that those lots are greater than this 45 per side, for sure. And if someone wants to do that, it's not prohibiting them. They can surely do that. This would just be the minimum that they would build to, and then they could either do that or go larger. So if someone wanted to do those ranch units, it seemed to, obviously those take more room.
I just did want to say that, yes, Commissioner Friedrich, you are right. It was 4,000, not 5,000 that we were proposing.
I mean, I think 45 is a workable number. I just worry about stuff that's been platted previously. If we have a bunch of non-conforming stuff now that are R2 lots that were platted at 80 feet, then what are we going to do?
Well, we have started dealing with that already. We do have a lot split process, and if it's a lot that was legally created, we will honor those. I mean, you can't require an applicant to come in, go through the process, get entitlement on a subdivision, and then pull the entitlement out from underneath that. So our intent is to work with those folks. There may be a case or two or three that have to come in and acquire a variance if they want to do a lot division for that offside that doesn't meet the standards now for that second side. So and I think that would be a clean way for us to deal with it. I'd rather not process 500 variances, and I don't think we'd have that many, but I think there'll just be a handful of those that probably have to go through the Board of Adjustment. But I believe that would be the cleanest way to deal with it. But we are, Stephen and I met with the developer yesterday, and he's going to have 10 more that he's doing that are kind of in track as far as ones that have been in the works and platted already, and so we will work with those folks, and then this is really the long term. This is where we're going. This is where, if you're going to create a new subdivision, this is the direction you're going to go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as to Jason's question, this is in our zoning code. It'll be for future rezoning. So anything that's already zoned R2
And platted.
platted is essentially grandfathered.
Entitled.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've entitled that R2, but if we change this to say it's got to be, each side's got to be 45 feet, and then their lot doesn't meet that because it was done prior, we're going to honor that? There's lots out there that are almost 95 feet wide that probably won't make it work in this 45. Because if you got a corner lot with a 15-foot setback on one side, and let's say you have a 10-foot easement on the other side, that isn't going to work.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be the candidate for the variance process. And I think they have a good case to acquire a variance because it's based on dimensional restrictions that we are also imposing on that site after the fact too. So,
I mean, you can understand because you can't split that lot right in half. Then you have to slide the building one way or the other to get away from the easement or the side setback.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've ran into problems even on 97-foot lots in the past. You have to slide it one way or the other. Pretty soon we were under, well, it's going to help that we're going down to 4,000 feet. Before we were always saying it had to be 7,500 or 7,000 square feet. So I mean, that'll help. But I think as long as we're willing to work with some of these lots that are out there that might not comply in the future, not just tell them, well, no, you can't build this building, then I think I'm fine with it. But, variance is fine. I mean, the process is there for a reason, I guess, so.
And I would agree.
Or Jennifer, could we get on that, the people prior to a change in an ordinance are protected, and they have the process to go, the legal process for them to go through variances if they so choose also, right?
Yes.
They are protected.
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman, that's the same, this would be a precedence moving forward, right?
Right.
Because I know in the past, we have half lots with 2 homes on 1 lot that we're dealing with too, and they're grandfathered until somebody buys the other half, but,
Yeah.
so as long as they're protected where they're at, otherwise that'll be an issue, trying to sell them.
Yeah, and that's an issue that I think developers, builders, even individuals have to look at when they purchase something, that, what can I do here? And that's a personal choice. Like, I don't want to buy it, or I do, and I'll figure it out.
Another question I have, since we have the fire department here, when they're so close together, does that become an issue too? I'd like to hear from you.
Mark with the Dickinson Fire Department. It can become an issue. There is code variance on it, and the building code will actually help on that as well. With single families, it's typically not going to be an issue unless they stack multiples together. I know we do have one that was built, that was an issue that was rather long because it's a problem for us to get to it, just for the fact that it's, I can't remember, it's upwards of 160-some feet long. And it's hard for us to do fire operations around that when it's that long. So if it stays in that smaller lot size, it shouldn't be an issue. And there of course is distances between buildings that could become an issue, but it should be covered by building code.
Thank you.
Was that enough input, Mr. Hadley?
I'd like to, if there's a this on 4,000 square foot lot and 45-foot minimum frontage per side, then yeah, I would like the direction to go ahead and notice this, and we'll have it on a hearing docket for next month to amend.
I think you have a consensus.
Okay. Thank you.
And anybody between now and then, if they come up with any really earth-shaking thoughts, let Mr. Hadley know.
Please do.
Mr. Josephson, are you on board?
Let me turn this on, yes. Steve Josephson, City County Planner, and Mr. Hadley had asked me to cover some proposed amendments to the code, and most of these are cleanup, or they are in response to some issue that we've run into in the past. You know, some of it is we found some typos in the codes, and others are just to bring things, up to, to reflect current situations. You know, for example, we talk about a certificate of zoning compliance, and that's actually issued by the planning department, and code was probably written at a time when there was no planner on board, so you'll see some references to, to building official when they're, this was done before there was a planning department, so some of those are just clarification. In your last round of amendments, you had removed from part of the code creative subdivision, so this is just removing that definition, since the creative subdivision's been removed from the zoning code, so this is just a cleanup. Putting in a new definition for communications tower. There's broadcast tower, which is pretty broad. This is an updated one, and I based this on looking at other codes, especially in this part of the country. We can just walk through these. There's a residential type two family residential, which is actually two separate structures on one lot, and I believe the way our code is written, it talks about one dwelling on one lot. Also, in terms, we identify under utilities, that we add something on there saying that communication towers will be considered a miscellaneous use, and this is that use table that's in 39.04. In terms of miscellaneous use types, just an updating from broadcast tower to communication tower. And this is all going to match what you're going to see later on, which is we're actually bringing forward some standards for communication towers, so that number one, the developers who come in and want to do, cell towers will have something in writing, and number two, when you write the conditions for the special use permits, we don't have to include all of that those things in as conditions because they'll already be in the code. In the terms of purpose of zoning districts, we looked under agriculture, and there was a reference to urban reserve in the comprehensive plan. The new comprehensive plan doesn't have a reference to urban reserve, so that was just to remove that. Medium density residential, it says something about having special regulations to encourage innovative forms of housing development. Didn't really see any in there. That just, that just removed that just as didn't really see anything in the code that really applied to that. Our standards are fairly straightforward in terms of single and different types of multifamily. In downtown commercial district, where it says mixed uses are encouraged, mixed uses are actually permitted in downtown commercial. All we have to do is walk around there and see where we have residential and businesses in the same building. DC zoning does allow that. Then we were going to the table, the development standards. And currently, we've had all this discussion about single-family attached and single-family detached, and we actually add some language in there where we differentiate between the two, with the single-family detached as being your traditional single-family home, and then the single-family attached, attached as being what we've discussed, and the minimum lot size would be 4,000 square feet. And then we had a clarification as to what a duplex is, which is supposed to be a one ownership, two families on a single lot with no division. Again, some of this stuff is clean up and updated as you go through here. There is no section 804 anymore, and that was in, there's no section 804 anymore that refers to landscaping. Pardon me. There was an issue, we found this with a case of someone who wanted to do the convenience storage, the mini storage, where they were doing it in limited industrial zoning district, and it was adjacent to limited industrial zoning district. And if you read they had to get a variance because if you read the code, you're supposed to have a 20-foot landscape buffer from adjacent properties. And given that those were the same zoning districts and similar uses, it didn't make much sense. So we were changing the wording there. I believe the intent was really to have a 20-foot landscape buffer from adjacent property lines if the adjacent properties are of a less intensive zoning district. This is so that people don't have to keep coming in for variances if they're building them against a similar, commercial or industrial zoning district. Also, we had some development standards that were listed for the GI zoning district, and then it said limited industrial, so that's just a cleanup in terms of the wording.
Steve, do we any place define what those buffers are?
You would ask me that. I believe we had that in our landscape section.
It just seems like that's always been a kind of a nebulous thing for us. We talk buffers, and when you get into the practicality of them, what are they, who takes care of them, what are the ongoing responsibilities, and some of that I don't know how we could put into code, but at least we could define what that buffer would consist of. And
I'll look into that, and I believe it's in the code, but typically a buffer area, it's on the property owner's property, and they're responsible for maintaining it. And the idea is that within that buffer area, you've got landscaping, you've got a screen, like a fence or a berm or something along those lines, and you're not supposed to have any activity occurring within those areas. And that's really more important if you've got, say, commercial commercial property that's adjacent to residential, to residential property. It's to try and move away the impacts of something commercial on that adjacent, residential property. Scenario, you can put landscaping within it and put a fence within it and so on, but you're not supposed to have any activity take place within that if you're adjacent to a piece of property that's less intensive or have uses that would, where there would be some issues. But I'll get back with you on that, Commissioner Jackson. I believe we do define that in the code.
Maybe this is more discussion than we intend today, but I don't know what the rest of you think, but fine, we require a buffer and say somebody plants these trees, whatever number and species, whatever, but 5 years later, there's no trees there. Well, where does that leave us, and where does that leave the intent of what we are trying to do and all that?
That becomes a code, well, that does become a code issue, and say they planted trees there on the buffer adjacent, if they realistically, if they don't think that landscaping, in some cases, landscaping is going to work, well, then put up a fence, or put up a wall. Now, there are certain circumstances where, say, it's along a roadway where you do require landscaping, and that's a different situation. That's a different situation. But yeah, if it's on the site and the property owner is obligated to do that, and they don't fulfill it, then it becomes a code compliance issue. Do you want to add anything to that, Walter?
Yeah, actually, we're gonna visit on a number of the spreadsheets of enforcement stuff. I know we've had lots of discussions on how are we going to follow up, how are those things going to be tracked, and I'll be honest with you in that some of those items from, say, 2012 forward haven't been tracked. Now we have them. They're all here, and we will follow up with the people that had entitlement approval and required to put those improvements in. They will be put on notice that they will need to put those back or improve them. Now, there are some instances, and I don't want to talk about specific subdivisions because I'm hoping that they will just maintain and do what they need to do. But we do have some subdivisions and developments that were approved that have buffer areas that were built in and didn't really find any provisions that it was a condition. It just wound up showing up. So we do need to make sure that we conditionally approve those items, whether it be from this level in the city commission or administratively through the process, so we can actually enforce that. If it's noted on the plat, then we could do that. We could follow up with that, but I think we do have a number of them that probably weren't followed up in that fashion, and so we will do our best to encourage them to continue to do what they were supposed to do. But there would be an enforcement point in time where Ms. Goss wouldn't be able to enforce it for us because we wouldn't have anything that said that they were required to do it. So
and enforce it on whom? It might be something we require of the developer, but the developer's gone, property's sold. So I don't know.
Homeowners association typically, but those don't seem to be as prevalent as far as working organizations in this community. I would like to see them be a little more active because, a lot of the times we get complaints on existing subdivisions, just since I've been here, it relates to issues or matters that would have been handled by a homeowners association if it was in place and if it was followed through with. They were conditions that were mitigating factors for neighboring properties or what have you, and we didn't necessarily have them as conditions that we can follow up with, but they were noted as conditions that would be improved and maintained by the homeowners association. So that puts us in kind of a bad position. I have a ongoing problem out in the ETZ that there's actually a homeowners association that was recorded, never formed, And they, they have lots of issues with road maintenance, uses, all of that type of thing. And, it really isn't the city or the county's interest at this point. It was created as a development that was going to be run by this homeowners association, and it doesn't exist. And so, typically those are created just as the developer is not the majority owner, then he typically will turn those over to the owners that are there, set up the meeting, set up the kickoff, and set up an election of a board that would then take that and move forward. So we are a little behind and lax on that. I don't know how to really make that, I can't really make it work for the old ones, but we can surely encourage it for the new ones. The old ones, it does create a problem.
I agree with Mr. Jackson on having it in the ordinance as far as buffers go, though, that it be fairly, even if it has to be worded, very defined, that property owners or developer knows ahead of time that they have a choice of buffers. If it can be worded that way, if there are choices, then they have to make that choice and they have to follow through with it. But it should be very well defined, so we don't have to do it here unless it's some special use permit application, that we don't have to sit here and figure out what the buffer is going to be down at the rodeo grounds or the fairgrounds. That it should be defined in that ordinance what that buffer is going to be and who's going to enforce it.
Our landscape section, has a fair amount of discussion about, it'll show different zoning districts and how much of a buffer is required, on those properties, and it also does give them the option of what kind of, whether it's a fence or a wall or a berm or landscaping or a combination of those. So we do have that, in the code. We can bring that if you wanted to. I'm not prepared to discuss that at this time.
No, for further discussion.
Yeah, but in the future, if you want a discussion about what our landscaping ordinance is currently has in there, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I'd like to see it very well defined if it isn't, and I mean, that's my input is, and also if there's a time factor in that ordinance, when that has to be done.
What I'm really getting at is, the definition, fine, we can come up with that. But what I'm wondering is, do we as a board have the appetite to really enforce it? Do we really want to do it? Because if we don't, then it's just kind of a wish thing.
Well, I for one think it should be enforced. It should be one of those things.
We've asked for a lot of buffers over the last 5 years, and some of them out in the county, out in the ETZ, and they're not there. So we can write ordinances to get tough on it and enforce it. Do we have the appetite to do that?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to address that as well, what we have in place is kind of the minimum standard, and we're always going to wind up, with circumstances like the fairgrounds, where it's a special use permit that comes through the door, and we feel that, we typically require this much of a buffer, but because of where it is, we now require that. So it would be kind of like our lot size discussion we had. We have some standards in place that are the minimum, but if it's something that's a larger use, has more impact to the neighbors, then we do have it in the provisions that the special use permit really is a use that's allowed with special conditions for that particular site. So I don't disagree with your comment on that we need larger buffers and it depends where it is and if it's feasible. But if it's through the special use permit process, it's really quite easy because unfortunately, yes, it would be great to say you wouldn't have to deal with it here, but I think, you will have to deal with them on a case-by-case measure when those folks come in. But day-to-day, administratively, the stuff that's allowed in the ordinance in that particular zone, then yes, if we want to look at bumping that up beyond where it is, then I think that's where we need to probably target. our discussion. Does that make sense? to you
That
as far as-
makes sense, and, I mean, just buffers do serve a purpose as far as the overall aesthetics of a city and livability, you know, making better neighbors, actually. It does, they function really well in a lot of places, but Mr. Jackson, whether or not it's enforceable, whether it's not, that it's one of those ordinances that, why write it if you can't do anything about it, or no one's going to follow it, or we don't want to, you know, bite into it and say, yeah, it has to be enforced.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think we have a coordinated effort that we're working on. We have Leonard here from the building department. Leonard does a lot of enforcement for the city, both building, planning, nuisance. He would be the integral part in some of the smaller, what I'll call the smaller enforcement after the individual. You know, how I see this working is our enforcement stuff that we have put together is we'll deal with the larger development issues, you know, so if it's a subdivision or a plan unit development that comes in, honestly, you know, Leonard is a busy guy. He doesn't necessarily need to start tracking down all the subdivisions as a whole and trying to make them conform. That would be something that we're going to take on and we're going to move forward on that they follow through with. Now, Leonard would address if someone built a home, someone didn't put in whatever, landscaping, sidewalks, whatever, or if there's a non-compliance issue with zoning, then he would follow up. Go ahead, Leonard, sorry.
Good morning, Commissioners. Leonard Schwind, building official for the City of Dickinson. I concur with Walter. My department does handle all code enforcement. With some of the proposed amendments seen on the paper here, there's just a couple that I would like to talk about, and then I'll go on to the buffer yards and landscaping. Item number 2, section 3902.006, I would like to see the building official stay on there. And section 3902.029 also, I'd like to see the building official stay on there. We do work hand in hand, and to duplicate and sometimes timeliness is everything. I've been with the city 14 years and been working with code enforcement and interpreting the code in the absence of a planner. So they're absolutely right. It was put in there probably absence of a planner, but we do it interchangeably. When I issue a certificate of occupancy, the certificate of zoning compliance is part of that. On an existing building, if there's a building or a business that doesn't meet our code, we issue those letters. It is code enforcement. So those are 2 items right there. As far as the tree requirement, with our slowdown, we will be going by, as part of code enforcement. People can plant that tree. We do give them the certificate of occupancy. It's gone. And in the last few years, we just haven't had time to go by and say, hey, get that in. Talking with Walter here, we'll probably be putting these trees in the right-of-way if we're able to. No one can remove a tree in a right-of-way without permission with the city. That will help us in that area. But private trees, you don't need a permit to take a tree down. So we do have a lot of those issues. There's a lot of people who don't like trees. They don't like the cleanup. But I think that should stay in our code, and we should really get on it and enforce it and get the backing from the city to enforce that.
The tree requirement, I would like to see that be anywhere on the property, a tree, not in the front yard. There's some corner lots that would require 5 trees on. I mean, where do you put 5 trees in the front yard of a corner lot?
I agree with Jason there, and if that's the case, that should be put on the building permit. But with the selling of a home, that next homeowner might, hey, I don't want these trees, I'm going to cut them down. And maybe we need to talk about a permit to remove trees, just to make sure that the properties meet zoning compliance, so we're not running around checking trees.
If I can, I'll jump in a little bit, just that the enforcement of some of the landscaping requirements that we had is very cumbersome, and it's taken from May 1st till probably 2 weeks ago to get us caught up on where we were. And I mean, Leonard's been dealing with it for a long time, and I think that what we have is a consensus is that we're moving forward. When we do new subdivisions, those trees will be in a boulevard or planted in public designated spaces along the roadways. And the requirement, I think, would go away for the individual lots. So that, you know, we actually would take hold of, from the city standpoint, take hold and control over what we actually have control over, which is in the public right-of-way. And, you know, if someone doesn't like a tree in front of the house that they're looking to purchase, they're just going to be reserved to the fact that they're going to have a tree in front of their house that they don't like. They can't remove it. That would be, you know, where we're going with this. It's much cleaner. You wind up with a much more finished community, and from an urban forestry standpoint, you actually wind up with a city that winds up having an urban forest instead of, you know, someone who may really like trees and they might have 10 in their yard, and then you go 3 or 4 or 5 houses down and there's nothing. It really doesn't. It doesn't create the feeling that I think that we're after as far as the urban forest, street tree, welcoming, cooling, soothing, you know, if you want to use all those fun words. It doesn't create that, and I think that's what we're actually after. It works quite well if you just require, when we require streets, sidewalks, curbs, lighting, all those good things to be put in, you put in trees as well. They're obviously then spaced appropriately, and that will work. So that's where we're going. So we're kind of struggling on how we deal with some of the old.
Well, what the issues is the placement of the sidewalk. People believe that their property runs to the curb. So different placements of sidewalks is where do you put that tree? We might end up with a 2-foot strip of green area where the sidewalks. Well, we're going to put that tree on the inside toward the house, and that's where I think Jason, with people putting trees on there, whether or not, again, I don't know how we'd enforce that, but I think giving people that choice helps with that community feel also.
Mm-hmm. And I do have one of the old requirements for landscaping that Leonard's aware of on the east side of town, that we have a deposit from them. They haven't put their trees in. We actually fortunately have, what, 10 feet of
right-of-way.
Of right-of-way in their front yard. So it doesn't appear that we do, but the sidewalk's out at the curb. And so we do, and I put them on notice that, you know, as of May 1st of this year, I'm going to call a landscaping person, and we're going to plant 2 trees in that area, and cash in there, and they didn't even respond. So I mean, it's a little bit, we're kind of in another touchy situation here, in that, you know, we had a program in place that when I came, I had a drawer full of checks for deposits of trees that people had put in because they wanted to get a CO from Leonard, and it was November, and
Right.
they couldn't do it.
And that policy no longer exists.
Right.
Just so everyone,
Right.
that was
And-
developed and it no longer exists.
And
What are we doing now? Because I'm not aware of anything different.
Well, we'll be putting trees in. Or you'll just get a temporary, you won't get a final.
I have a question, Lenny, on that. It used to be every 50 feet for a tree?
It's the landscape depth times 500, or times the frontage divided by 500 is your tree requirement.
Okay.
And generally on a 75-foot lot, you might have 2. I believe that's, unless that changed, I didn't go through that.
Because we have some that planted the tree, like if they're on a corner lot,
Mhm.
now they're asked to remove it because it's restricting the view for,
Actually, when you plant a tree on a corner lot, the canopy height on the bottom needs to be at least 4 feet, so that you, as you drive up, you can see under it. There are some that are, again, it's code compliance, where we'll work with this, when we get a city forester to raise those, if they're in the right-of-way, we'll raise that canopy height up to 4 feet.
so they don't just have to tear it down.
No.
Okay, thank you.
The reason we went to the deposit is Leonard's lenders will not accept a temporary CO.
Right, on a new subdivision, I mean, this is quite simple. I mean, if new subdivision, if someone's gonna come in the door and do a subdivision, and it looks like this, before they start building, you won't have the issue, the only reason you would get a temporary CO from Leonard would be if it was building or site stabilization or whatever. The landscaping, the site improvements off-site
Would be
aren't
complete.
tied to it.
But they would be in.
Right. So when they obtain a building permit, they would either have a bond in place for those improvements to be put in place by the time that CO would be issued, or it just wouldn't be issued. So all of the street trees, and as far as placement, I mean, I'm hoping that we would be able to sit down with Craig, sit down with everybody involved, look at a proposed subdivision and place the trees, lights, what have you, in appropriate places where they wouldn't be blocking, where they wouldn't, appropriate types. It really is going to, we're bumping up our site plan review meetings to where we're actually going to start reviewing some of the old stuff, but we're actually going to review all of the new stuff there too, as a group. And so that winds up bringing everybody to the table that might have an issue with a particular improvement, say street trees being planted. Maybe the garbage guy doesn't, it won't work for him how it's arranged. And so we're going to hear from him and actually move that forward. So, I mean, we have to understand that we have a number of years when we had chaotic growth and a lot of things going on here, and there probably wasn't the same level of follow-up that we're going to have now. And what we're trying to do is put that in place so we actually have it in place, and it can be done when we have more growth too. So it's a transition. I mean, Jason, I agree with you 100%. We have a bunch of things that were done, and right, wrong, indifferent, it was the best that I think the city could do at the time. And I think what we're looking to do is just improve on that process so it's more clear for everybody.
The only thing that you said that concerns me is that the CO would not be issued. There you're putting the penalty on the person that already bought the lot from the developer, not the developer. Not issuing a CO doesn't matter to the developer. He's been paid for the lot already.
You're right. My solution to that would be that we shouldn't issue any permits then. I mean,
And that's fine.
The idea would be to, the only idea of Leonard issuing a permit as that work was going on would be to facilitate development.
We've done this in the past where you didn't put your grass in, or the neighbor did something different, or something's not right. We're not going to issue a CO, or the street kind of lifted up in front of your house, so we're not going to issue a CO. But that builder's paid for the lot. He's got a homeowner that's waiting to move into that house. He's got a lender that's on the line to close that, a construction loan. We're penalizing that person, and the developer's long gone.
I think with proper planning, especially with the upcoming building season, knowing that this has to be in before that building season is out. I know the timeliness or how you're building that home, it can be done, that final landscape can be in without the siding on the house. The trees can be put in at that time, so, I mean, it is planning.
Right. We're talking about a lot of different things here right now.
Yeah.
And I think to Jason's concern, I think we can't do that. We can't let that crossover happen between builder and developer. It's just not fair. And to me, the only way to do it with developer is with bonds, which they're not a panacea. They're not the ultimate answer, or a deposit for things that a developer is responsible for. The rest of it, we have to be more real time with, and
If we have a surety, I would agree. I think that,
But I don't think you want to ask a home builder to give you a bond for
No.
trees.
Well, I mean,
No.
I'm confused here. We're mixing two different things.
Yeah.
So, what is the homeowner going to be required to do to get a CO? That's what I want to know.
The contractor that's building my home is going to have to come in, get a building permit, meet the requirements for the building code, meet the requirements as far as probably putting some stabilization on the site, meet all of his requirements. We're not tying, what I'm saying is we're not tying the street, sidewalks, street trees, street lighting, all of those improvements aren't tied to you getting a CO.
Okay, so we're not going to be required to have the lawn in before the season?
Well, there's certain stabilization issues through building code that you need to do.
You would have to have it stabilized so it doesn't run onto the established yard next.
I mean,
next
but you
to it.
could put
I mean,
a wattle in or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what we've done in the past.
Okay, but then, Jason, how do you assure that that lawn gets in? Because we know there are some home builders that walked away from stuff like that.
Actually, our code right now doesn't require lawn. I mean, it calls for landscaping. You can use rock. I mean, that buffer yard is at 15 feet where most people, we have a 25 front yard setback, and a lot of yards are lawn.
Whatever the issue,
Yeah.
though,
I mean, as a builder, I
you're
don't-
doing it.
I don't do it. Builders don't normally do the landscaping. That's the homeowner after they take over.
I'm talking about any issue, whether it's landscaping or whatever it may be.
Is what?
How do we assure that that gets done, whatever the issue is?
I mean, I think there's a requirement that they have to have it landscaped in a certain period of time, isn't it?
Yes.
And that has to go on the homeowner.
That goes
the
on
property owner, right?
Property.
Actually is tied to the building permit. During the transition of selling that property, that gets put on that new owner. We hold the permit holder to that.
And sometimes homeowners or property owners get caught up not realizing something should have been done or that they were responsible for. And they're caught in between the bank, the developer, the money they've spent. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. But there's usually a solution to getting that CO, if that's the question. There's always...
We work with, we definitely
Right.
work with.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's always a solution to it because
Yes.
here, I mean, timing can be, you might want to occupy that house in December, but you're not going to get anything landscaped. If you
Absolutely.
got 2 feet of snow and it's going to be low until maybe May, who knows, or when it dries out. So there's always something written in there, or there's always a solution for those situations. I think.
We just cannot get in the habit of issuing temporary COs because lenders will not accept them, so that will hold up financing, get these houses closed. That's the way we're going. We need to come up with a different plan because it will not work. Lenders will not accept temporary COs.
Well, from the land use side, honestly, my background is dealing with subdivisions that are completely built and then building permits are issued. So I think that is the direction that is the cleanest. It's not always the most popular because, as you're building a home, obviously you're going to have curb, sidewalk, whatever there. You're going to, have to bridge over it. You're going to have to do a number of things to work around it. But, we also have concerns in the community for areas that have been subdivided where sidewalks just end. And maybe there haven't been 2 or 3 lots built upon. And so, if they're not built upon for another 20 years, we really haven't, in my opinion, put in the infrastructure that was required when that was subdivided and put in. So I think that, whether it's a pond, whether it's a deposit that we hold to improve whatever hasn't been improved, I don't think we tie it to you as a builder on the first home in that subdivision. I think we tie it to a time frame that when we entitled that, we say, okay, you have all these improvements in by this date, or we will take your deposit or cash your bond in, and Craig will go build it.
So you're telling me you're going to make the developer put the sidewalks in the whole development before you build the house? Well, how are you going to do the curb cuts? You're going to tear that sidewalk back out?
Are you going to do what?
The curb cuts, where in your approaches, you can tear those sidewalks back out. Because the sidewalk, wherever your driveway is, has to be thicker. So, I mean, how are you, it's
Well,
impossible.
there's a lot of places in the country that actually they plan that ahead of time. I mean, they know. I mean, this development, some of the developments that we were talking to a developer yesterday, he actually planned out a whole block, and it's been planned for a couple of years.
If you're building tract housing and you have 2 plans and you build the same plans throughout the development, that doesn't happen in Dickinson.
I know there are, yeah, exactly. I know there are a lot of places that when you see the subdivision plat, you see the footprint of the house and the driveway on the subdivision plat. you know,
Yeah,
in our
that
climate,
doesn't
we
happen in
can't
Dickinson.
do that, I don't
No.
think. It'd be nice, but I just don't think we can do that.
No. You're gonna have one guy building a 1,500 square foot house, and the next guy next door is gonna buy 2 lots and build a 2,500 square foot house. And his driveway's gonna be in a different spot than this guy's driveway. That isn't gonna work, not in Dickinson. I just don't see how that's gonna work.
But how are we going to ensure that those improvements then get put in a timely
Then
manner?
do it like Bismarck. The sidewalks and curb cuts and approaches get special to the lot, and the city does them, and they're done.
Yeah, I don't know that the city commission is excited about doing specials for that.
Well, generally not, but maybe for a specific thing like this, maybe it makes sense.
I mean, that's how Bismarck's done it for years. They signed a contract with a concrete guy in the beginning of the year. When you're done building, you call and get on the list, and they come and put in your sidewalks,
And
do your
Bismarck
curb
doesn't
cut, and
have-
your approach.
Bismarck doesn't have the same considerations we do, of course.
But I mean, that's what they do. I mean, that's why they assure that those lots are done. But even if you drive around Bismarck, there's lots and subdivisions that don't have sidewalks on them. I mean, there's some lots that just don't get built on.
Yeah, there are. There are. And it is a problem, but I don't know that it's the end of the world. Because most of those lots in a developing subdivision are going to get filled up, and once in a while you might have one. So to give the city commission, to give the city of Dickinson the ability to special the last 5% of the lots that don't get developed, I don't think there's much risk there. I think that's not.
No, I agree with that. I mean, yeah, you don't want to see a lot that doesn't have sidewalk on for 20 years, I agree. But to go put them in prior doesn't make sense either. You're just going to end up tearing them out.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's got to be some middle ground there.
Well, I think it's a timing issue. I think, you know, it's a reasonable amount of time that if they aren't put in a reasonable amount of time, which is what? You know, if someone's doing a subdivision, it might be a couple of years.
I think
Maybe
that
we have a bond that you hold for that for a
this
couple of
is
years.
going to require a whole lot of more discussion, the issue we're on right now. And
And we should leave the issue, but, you know, this sidewalk issue is an example. You should pursue it and force us to make a decision on it, and let's get it behind us so you guys can do your work, you know, whatever it is.
And I know, you know, it's a tough thing, and I don't think we're going to come up with an answer that makes everyone happy, but I will, you know, Gene shared with me the history of part of state sedition, and, you know, how the city wound up getting, the city got most of those, or a lot of those lots back, correct? Well, they actually had a value, and for economic development, when you did get them back, yes, they might not have been worth $55,000 a piece when you got rid of them. I know you're going to smile and say no, but at least they were entitled lots. And just imagine if that was an entitled lot and there were no streets, sidewalks, improvements there, what kind of a project it would have taken just to make those buildable. And that's what I think this also avoids. You know, if they didn't, and I know it looked silly for years, you know, to have paved roads, curbs, whatever, with nothing over there. But it's kind of like where the hospital is now. That looks rather silly too. But, you know, I think there's some interest over there now, and it actually is an economic development driver, if you will. I think Shirley would much easily sell a lot on a curb-lit, sewer-provided, all the services there lot than one that may, or, you know, the city has a guarantee that we might have it put in 5 years. So I think it, you know, there's a balance there. That's where I'm coming from, is I think that there's a balance that we also need to look like we're requiring a finished product.
I don't disagree with you. And when it comes to street lights, curb gutter, street paving, I have no issue with. When you're talking curb cuts, sidewalks, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, you don't need a subdivision with 100 lots with sidewalks in there if there's nothing in there. I mean, it could sit there for 10 years if there's nothing being built in there. It doesn't really matter. Nobody's going through there anyway. So, I mean, state's edition, the roads were closed off. I mean, there was no access for 15 years into there, unless you went through the fence, which a lot of us used to do. But, but Yeah, the sidewalk issue and the temporary COs, I mean, I understand there's got to be things done to get a CO. I get that. But if we start issuing temporaries, the reason we got away, started taking the deposits from people was to guarantee they would do this stuff. It's kind of a bond or whatever you want to call it, so they could get a CO, so their bank would close their financing. We can't go back to that way because it won't work.
Right.
So,
Believe me, yeah, I didn't like it either, so, yeah.
I think that point has to be really looked at. That's going to take a lot of discussion. And Mr. Josephson brought us to this point when he was doing the zoning code cleanup.
Yep.
And I'm going to excuse myself, I do have a dental appointment, and I'm going to return this back to Mr. Josephson, Mr. Hadley. And do you remember where you were?
Yes, I do. I've got it right in front of me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is something I think the building department will want to get involved with this discussion too, is it's the last thing I'm going to bring up on page 15. We have in our code in section 39.06.009 in terms of supplemental use regulations, we address open storage for commercial properties. And the idea has been or outdoor storage. Let's be specific, outdoor storage. The idea has been that with certain commercial businesses, you're going to have a certain amount of outdoor storage. It's supposed to be incidental and accessory to the property. You know, so the main use there is whatever the use is itself, and we recognize that there's going to be some outdoor storage involved with it. I think we've had some issues where you've had creep, and over the years, the commercially zoned site is turned into all outdoor storage, and you know, the idea here is to put something in the code that would actually state that the amount of outdoor storage to be used, and it's only for these specific uses listed here, is that it would be less than 25% of the building footprint. And if they want to do more than that, then they would come to the city and request a special use permit. So at least it would give the public an opportunity to comment on, you know, on additional. We're looking at community commercial and general commercial properties, not industrial zoning. And it could also require the city to impose require additional buffering and screening standards. And this has been an issue. So I'm just bringing this up in front of you for your consideration, is to actually put something on there that defines how much of a commercial property for these uses can be used for outdoor storage related to that business. Leonard, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, Steve. With actually, we are having some issues with some outside storage. If some property owners realize that they might be able to get a special use permit, they exceed it and then come in and essentially ask for forgiveness. I don't know that it's a good idea. I mean, we have established zoning areas which allows a certain amount of outdoor storage. I think we should leave it at that. Because people just tend to add. Even myself, hard to throw things away.
Are we still on the cleanup, or you want to move on to?
Well, that's it. And
That's it.
And that's the end of
Okay.
That's the end of my presentation. What I would emphasize is at least we have in the code saying, if you have this kind of a business, then the area that you can use for outdoor storage is going to be restricted. And that, you know, that's something when they come through the site plan review process, you know, we can find that, and they would define in their site plan, you know, how much of it's going to be used for outdoor storage, which is different from outdoor warehousing, which is a primary use. But too often we've just seen, as Leonard stated, times where people have turned a whole commercial lot into outdoor storage, and that was not the intent, and it's an eyesore and an enforcement issue and a safety issue. And I'm finished with my item. Thank you.
All right, so are we ready to move on to number 3 then, annual application review?
Oh, yes, we are, sir. What I'm going to do is just briefly go over number 3 and number 4 kind of all together. You'll see a couple spreadsheets that you have stapled together in front of you. And what they reflect are basically special use permits, plan unit developments, and the existing development agreements that we have for whether it be plan unit developments or subdivisions within the city and the ETZ. This is our, and I'll call it our 2015 update. These documents will never be finalized because they change all the time. So what we'll do is, this is what exists today. Brandy is working on a subdivision one that's a little more comprehensive as far as the listing of subdivisions, and that's where we'll probably find some of those conditioned, non-conditioned, assumed approvals for improvements that were going to be done or monitored by a homeowners association. So really, there's no sense in going through individuals. This is more of an informational thing. I think Jason's brought up a number of times, and I totally agree. When and how are we going to follow up on things? And this is where we start. So we start with identifying where they are. It's no different than what Leonard does with the day-to-day enforcement of the codes that he follows up with. He has to have some sort of a baseline that he's taking off from, and this is where we're taking off from. So we're utilizing these lists. Unfortunately, our records don't go back. Prior to, I think you see a 10 and an 11 there. Prior to that, we don't have a lot of documented.
Prior to that, there wouldn't be much, if anything.
If anything. So, I mean, I get calls from folks all the time that did something in 2007. Just got one yesterday. He's going to produce something that was an approval from the city, and that's fine. We'll definitely look at it and try to deal with it then. But I guess we're not going to spend a whole lot of effort trying to go back farther than what we have here. So if it seems like we have a very short history, we do from the information that we actually have. But we are going to follow up with all of these.
I think the first DA ever done in the city was probably Sundance. I think that might have been the first DA we ever did. PUDs, there may have been a PUD or two 20 or 30 years ago, I don't know, but even PUDs, that's a recent activity.
Well, we've got North Industries in 10.
Yeah, okay.
And we have, if you look at that, if you look at development agreement one, just interesting, we do have a bonding requirement now in our code, and if you just go through the 5th column there where it says bond, and you look down that, our bonding requirement is actually 100%, I believe now, 110%. And I don't know exactly, this is where we need to have some consistency, in my opinion, is that if we're going to require bonds, or we require, if it's 150%, if it's 120%, if it's whatever it is, as you can see, those numbers are all over the board, and some of them don't have any. So we need to be consistent with that, obviously, just like with everything else that we do. The consistency in what we do is what makes it easier for people to follow through, and it makes it easier for us to follow through all the way down the line. We are going to follow up with these. I've been working on some development agreements with Mr. Kubas and Ms. Goss, trying to get a handle on where we are and what we're going and how we're going to follow up. You're going to notice on there that some of them are entitled to get a letter that says that their entitlement approval has been expired. It's basically expired. So their use, if they want to pursue that, they're going to have to come back before this board, before the city commission to move forward. So there are going to be some that get a letter that states that. Special use permits are they're a little easier. Stephen went through most of those. A lot of cell towers, I think, are our main main culprits that haven't been built that may or may not be built. I think the cell folks are going to shorter towers and more of them. So I think we'll probably see more applications for those. With Stephen's dialogue with them, I think, how many are there? 3 or 4 that aren't going to be built, maybe?
Yes, and the thing is, the way that our code is written, it's going to, if there's no construction done, there's no development done, it expires after 2 years. The special use, and I've been in touch, it's been primarily the Verizon representative, has had it, I think what they've done is they've looked at different locations and then entered into lease agreements with the idea that something may or may not happen. But they are on notice that if the tower is not constructed within 2 years of approval by City Commission, then the special use permit goes away. And that's part of the thing we have in the tracking anyway, is that you can see there have been instances of special use permits where, due to changes in circumstances, it was never constructed and it expires, and we have let the applicants know that, and it's clearly stated in the code. But we've had cell towers, we've had, I think after that is probably childcare centers. Recently, you had a special use permit for the school out in the ETZ. It's been a number of things that we've had for special use permits. So, as Walter is right, we've been, I wouldn't say inundated, but we've had, cell towers. But as I said, a number of those will probably, if they don't build there, they will go. That special use permit will go away.
And we have instituted a numbering system for all of our applications, so they're a little easier to follow. It's by year, number of permits for that particular year. Poor Brandy has had to deal with me as far as putting together new numbering and organization of some of that stuff. So thank her when you leave. She's very tolerant. Anyway, with that, I don't know if you have any questions on that. Once, maybe every quarter, or what we'll do is, these documents are always going to be around. So, today you'll take it, and in a week or two, it'll be outdated. So, I mean, if there's a question on something or whatever, please don't hesitate to give us a call. But it may be every quarter, I think, would be reasonable to give you a copy of what it is, what the updated version of this is, and maybe give you kind of an update on it'll show you the folks that we put on notice that, said their entitlement is now gone, or this application's been pulled, they're not going to do it, so it's canceled out. So it's, once again, it's the beginning stages of doing the follow-up that we need to follow up with for all of these things that we approve and pass forward. So,
Mr. Hadley, I have a concern about streetlights. I know what happened in Coke Meadows. Now I see this on Sundance Coves. They don't have their streetlights in, and neither do Roars. So what's going to happen? I mean,
I believe that Sundance Cove is actually putting in their streetlights. I think they've committed to Mr. Kubis that, I believe we've taken the roadways over there, but I believe they've given us some payment to repair some of the roadway failures that are out there. And I believe that Myers has committed that they are putting streetlights in. I think that was part of their approval that they needed to do. So yes, I think that's moving forward. The others, what was the other site?
well, out at Roars Westridge, where they're all in?
Yeah, they're in and out.
Okay. Just not phase 2, because they haven't done that yet, just phase 1 is done?
All the paved streets have lights on them now.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was pretty new. I mean, that's a newer one, and so anything that's relatively recent, the lighting requirement came back in the mix of how we were reviewing and doing things. So I think that one's resolved, or it will be.
Good, because we have a lot of concerned people that ended up with specials, or going to end up with specials for streetlights north.
I'm one of them.
I know. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to number 5, sign ordinance revisions.
Right, Commissioners, the city adopted, revised its sign code, I believe it was in 2014, and some of this is cleanup, here. One of the things we had was a pylon sign, with the idea being that there's an actual visible base as opposed to a pole sign, and that the pole is covered. And this is just stating that it's going to be enclosed with a similar architectural material to match the structure, and that's typically the color, just something so that it looks similar to the structure that was being built. One issue we ran into was the temporary signs. And the issue with temporary signs is we've tended to treat them more as for grand openings or other events or whatever, but there are those circumstances where people will open a business and they want to put a sign out that's visible from the street, and typically we'd say, well, then get a permit, put in a ground sign. Well, given our weather here, that's impractical during the winter time. So we've set this up so that someone can put up a temporary ground sign that for 60 days or until the installation of the permanent sign, with the provision in there that that 60-day period may be extended by the planning director if there are extenuating circumstances. So we're trying to cut those folks a break by allowing them to advertise their business with a ground sign until such time that they can put in a temporary one until such time that they can actually install one. And those are the only sign things I have right now.
Any questions at all?
Stephen, were you going to go over the
cell tower stuff? Yes. And then the last thing is to actually put some provisions into our code about communication towers. Since I've been here, we've had a number of consultants who have come in for the cell tower companies wanting to put them in, and what you see in front of you reflects the conditions that the city approves for special use permits. And by putting this in there, this is clear to the developers what our standards are. And I actually looked at some western states and looked at what was in their code for a minimum. So this is fairly similar to what you might see in other jurisdictions in this part of the country. We have something similar in the county's zoning ordinance. One of the things that we put in here was to actually establish what the minimum setback is. In the past, we've typically asked that it be, that the setback be the minimum, the maximum height of the pole. And this is just putting something in there that it's 1.25 times the maximum height, with a provision that if there's a habitable residential structure adjacent to it, the tower has to be 1.75 times the height of that tower. But we're also allowing a chance for, to vary that if the cell tower company comes in with a fall down letter, the ones that say that if it falls, it's going to fall, it's going to be contained on the property, and if the adjacent property owner says that they don't object to it being a little bit closer. So this is really not much different than what you've been approving, that you've been recommending in the special use permits. But it just puts it out there. Our code doesn't have anything right now, and trust me, this is a big issue everywhere.
I think this is a good step forward, and I think that's what we're talking about in some of the landscaping, some of the other issues that we have. This one's a little more clear because it's a pretty well-known application. Every time it comes in the door, they're very similar, and so it's easy to put these conditions in. And this is, like Stephen said, a list of conditions that have been adopted and approved by you. Now, when folks come in to apply, they can just look at it, say this is going to be required. It also cut down the dialogue.
Right, and you'll have shorter staff reports too.
So it would be up to the communication company to show you guys that they have concurrence from the adjacent property owners?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Be part of their application. Yep.
All right, any other questions? Is there anything else to be brought before the board? Walter, you have anything else?
Well, the only other thing I have is, you know, obviously we had quite a discussion on it, the zoning code cleanup. I mean, are any of these items that we talked about besides the minimum lot size, something that you're comfortable with us noticing and having a hearing on to move forward?
I would say just a statement that Jason, or excuse me, that Leonard had made regarding some of those changes to include a building official. Was that going to be whatever you wanted?
If you're in concurrence, that's fine. It's up to you. It's just, it's how it's worded. And I would say in this last portion where it talks about special use permits, that one should be, and I don't know that Leonard really wants to be involved in that. I knew he'd shake his head no. It did designate both the building official and the planning director in that, and we struck the building official, and I don't think Leonard wants to have that ability. So yes, if we want to include him in the upper two that he mentioned, that would be fine. We're just trying to clean it up. I mean, you know, obviously his department dealt with all of this stuff for a while, and then it was all taken away, and then now it's kind of partially back, and so we're trying to make sense of what the organization that we actually have now in our code, which isn't the easiest thing to do. I mean, we can work the items out, but we'd like it to be reflected black and white, you know, so when someone picks it up so they actually know too. So I would say that that last notation where it talks about special use permits, I think we want to strike Leonard from that.
Okay.
But if you'd like to include him on the others, that's fine with me, so.
That's all. Thank you.
To your question, Walter, I think you should move forward with this stuff. I mean, we've had a chance to comment. I think you should move forward. And I'd encourage you to keep going. I know it's probably frustrating for you that you don't get the answers from us sometimes that you need, but keep,
It's a process, you know, it is a process, and I think it's frustrating and long, and I promised that this meeting was going to be shorter, and I guess I lied. But, you know, it is difficult to re-look at some of these items, propose changes, and have some sort of a concurrence, and really, you know, if there isn't some sort of a concurrence on something that we're internally looking to change, we probably aren't ready to put it on a public hearing. So, I mean, you know, I appreciate that, and I don't think, and on our plan, if you look at our scope for the year, our plan is to, as much as we can, every month, bring a couple items to talk about that will then be followed up in a month or so with a hearing to adopt. So I think you'll see lots of changes this year to our code, and hopefully good changes. I mean, ones that I think that are necessary, and you know, if you don't think ones are necessary, please voice your opinion. I mean, you know, that's why we're here, and that's actually why I wanted a synopsis of this reflected in a short synopsis in the minutes, just to show, so the public knows, so everyone knows what we're talking about, and if there's an opinion on it from the public, you know, we'd like to hear it. We would like to hear it, because, you know, this is the City of Dickinson's plan, and we want to make sure that it reflects the direction that we want to go as a community. And, you know, there's parts of it that don't.
What you're doing with the DAs and the PUDs, I think, is really important to, good to see that done.
It does need to be done.
And
okay.
I just wanted to add real briefly, Commissioner Jackson, as things come up where we see how the code works or doesn't work, you know, we're going to look at, you know, at potential changes. I think, what was this code done about 15 years ago, something like that. And circumstances change, and quite honestly, some of these things probably weren't dealt with until recently. So trust me, we'll go forward and find more things to bring to you.
And we will dedicate one meeting to the subdivision ordinance itself. I know Craig has some issues, and he and I have had some dialogue on some proposed changes. Steve and I have, Gene and I have. We're going to wrap those together. That's a little bigger animal because there's more pieces involved and more departments involved. So we'll shoot for another month or two away for that probably. But and then we can address some of the things that, you know, we talked about today at great length for the improvements and how we do that. What our expectations are, what our bonding requirements are going to be, what the improvements by the developer are going to be, what is going to be required right out of the chute. And that's where we can maybe craft the verbiage that makes sense for the sidewalks and we just need to come up with something that works for us, and right now, obviously, we've had some challenges with some of the processes that maybe haven't worked as well as we wanted them to. With that, I'll be quiet.
All right. Well, I agree with Gene. I think we need to move forward as well. I think we need to realize that, we'll never be perfect. There will always be something that'll come up that we probably miss, but I think we need to move on. Is there anything else come before the board? Can I have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second motion.
Motion second. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.